things that really helped you become who you are today?
Having a brand and ethos that was very transparent. From the very beginning, we put the name of the estate that we were sourcing the coffee from. We put the date that coffee was roasted because coffee is actually a perishable product. So Namrata is the one. She actually made the logo as a peacock. Peacock is the national bird of India because we really wanted to highlight that this is Indian coffee.
Do you remember instances they were almost like the company could have shut down?
The biggest one would have been COVID because we didn't have a very strong cash position. We had signed a term sheet, but then COVID happened and then that term sheet got withdrawn. But that was very much an existential moment.
What kept you going?
Hundreds of staff who were relying on us. That was the biggest thing, is feeling a responsibility towards the team and trying to get an outcome that was able to salvage this.
Also, tell us inflection points that really gave you a lot of confidence.
During COVID, where lockdowns are happening, you're really worried about getting COVID. People were putting on masks and putting on whatever PPE and coming and willing to stand outside of cafes so that they could get the coffee. This product that we had was something that people were desiring so much.
What advice would you give to Indians who are living abroad?
There's so much more opportunity here in India. Like if we were to have opened this business in the US, we would be one of 5,000 or 10,000 coffee companies. It'd be very hard for us to differentiate ourselves and create something of scale.
I had a lot of fun having conversation with Matt Chitharanjan. Matt moved back to India and introduced specialty coffee to India. He founded a company called Blue Tokai, which is one of the largest coffee chains in India. We covered a bunch of topics: his early life, why he moved back to India, founding story of Blue Tokai, the changes in the consumer behavior in India, and the market of coffee. And we also got to know about who is the outside of work and his advice to Indians who are thinking about moving back to India and what opportunities India holds. Excited to have you on the podcast, Matt.
Really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I messaged you. My every morning coffee is by Blue Tokai.
That's great to hear.
And it's because of the taste. I've tried many, but you're the one who has created a new market, or you've introduced specialty coffee to India. Maybe to begin with, Matt, let's start by really, talking about your early life.
Sure.
What shaped you the most while growing up?
Yeah. So I actually grew up in a small town in the US, in a state called Wisconsin. It's a very rural place. So it's quite individualistic culture, I would say, compared to here in India, where it's a bit more communalistic. And I remember growing up, I would ask my grandma for help on small things, and she would say, "The Lord helps those who help themselves." So I'm not religious, but that idea of sort of self-reliance was really inbuilt from a very young age. And actually, both my parents were professors. So academics were something that they always really pushed a lot. And so doing well in school and being very academically oriented was always something that has been instilled from a young age. But at the same time, we did a lot of, I would say, out-of-the-box travel experiences. So when I was in high school, we spent a year living with my family in India, which is a very different experience growing up in a small town in the US and living in Chennai for a year. My mom did field work in Haiti, so I visited her. Was in Egypt. So these were all kind of places that were not sort of like Europe, which would be quite similar to the US. So I think that idea of experiencing different things was something that's really been core to me growing up.
Got it. And let's move towards your education, college, and post that where all did you work, and the experiences that you picked up along the way.
Yeah. So I went to NYU. I did a finance degree. So math and numbers were always something that I was interested in. After graduating, I moved to San Francisco, to the Bay Area. I was working at an economic and real estate consulting company. So I did that for a few years. Then they also had a hedge fund. So I started working with the hedge fund. Because I mentioned both my parents were professors, I thought, okay, I also want to be a professor. So then I went to Canada and I did a master's degree there. I quickly realized that academics wasn't really my cup of tea. It was too theoretical. I was more interested in kind of the practical execution aspects of it. So then I started doing international development work. So then I moved to Jordan in the Middle East. I did a project there for a year. Then I moved back to the US. I was working there for a couple of years. Then an opportunity came up to move to Chennai, and so I kind of took that, and that was sort of the start of my return back to or coming back to India.
Uh-huh. Uh, I I was in Jordan, and
Oh,
one of
wow.
the most magical experiences I had was in Dead Sea.
Yeah, yeah,
Man.
yeah. I mean, it's actually, it's a fantastic country. So they have the Dead Sea, they have Petra, they have these desert areas that have kind of oases that you can do trekking in. You can stay with Bedouins, and it's actually very safe.
Yeah,
I had an amazing time when I was living there.
yeah, yeah. I went there for a short trip on a for a tennis tournament.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And what was that opportunity in Chennai that you got, Matt, and that made you move back? What was it?
Yeah.
Talk more on that.
Yeah, so I mentioned I was doing international development projects. So I was actually living in a town. I was living in Connecticut, and I was quite miserable there. So I was just trying to find a way
Uh-huh.
to get out of there.
Yeah.
And then I stumbled upon this opportunity to work for IFMR, which is a research organization in Chennai. And so basically, what they do is they coordinate with universities in the U.S. and Europe, and they execute the research projects here on the ground. So I thought it was a good kind of mix of academia plus practical execution work. Honestly, I thought I would come here for a year, and then I would move on to some other project somewhere else. But life took a different turn.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about that turn,
Yeah.
Matt. We're sitting in 2024. You're here,
Yeah.
and you're living a great life. You're crushing it. So yeah, let's talk about that
Yeah.
that point.
So I moved there, and actually, it was an incredible place to be working at that point in time for me at least. It was a bunch of sort of mid 20s to early 30s people who mix of people from India, but also from outside. Really great group of people, and Chennai at that time was. It's a big city, but it's really very traditional and more like a urban village. And so I think because of that, it was very easy to bond with people. And actually, the closest friends that I have now are the people that I worked with when I was there at IFMR. Then I also ended up, my wife, Namrata, she was working at that sister organization, same building. And so that's how I ended up meeting her. And then, we ended up falling in love and getting married. Having gone to college in New York and living in San Francisco, I didn't find Chennai as the sort of the vibrant city that I was used to. And her parents are from Delhi, or they lived in Delhi. So we had visited, and I loved Delhi. I thought it had such a great energy, and just was kind of the type of city that I was looking for. So we ended up so about a year that I was at IFMR, we moved to Delhi, still consulting for IFMR. But then, we're both at points in our careers where we wanted to do something on our own. And for me personally, I had done desk jobs my entire life. So I was looking to do something that was more physical, kind of create something with my hands. And I found coffee was something that was quite lacking. So if I look at my sort of coffee journey, growing up in the US, coffee is it's a strong part of the culture. So I think probably I had my first cup of coffee when I was 12, and it was instant coffee because that was just kind of the common coffee around. Once in a while, my parents would get, there was a local roaster called Godiva, and they would get the coffee from them, and that was sort of like a treat. But coffee is something that I grew up with. So when I was in college, I would go to Starbucks because I just wanted something hot and bitter with a lot of caffeine to sort of keep me alert for studying. It was really more of a functional beverage. But moving to San Francisco, I was there at a time when specialty coffee culture was really taking off and becoming more of the mainstream coffee culture. So there were brands like Ritual and Blue Bottle who were showcasing how coffee could be so much more than just something that's a functional drink. It could be something that you could really enjoy. So where the coffee comes from, how it's roasted, how you brew it, these all unlock different flavors, and it can be, as complex as a wine even. And so that got me really interested in coffee as something much more than just the caffeine aspect of it. And I started roasting coffee on my own as a hobby. So fast forward to when we were trying to think of ideas of what to do, coffee was there. Like I also brew beer. So the first idea was, okay, let's start a brewery.
Yeah.
And actually, Narmata ended up, I don't know if you know Ankur Jain, the founder of Bira.
Yeah.
So Narmata actually worked with him. So she kind of introduced me to him, and we had some conversations about how I could get into the beer industry. But the capital required, plus the licensing, plus not being from India, it just seemed too daunting at that time. So that's when we started looking at coffee more carefully. And this was in 2012. And so there was no real premium coffee, actually. The premium coffee brands were, CBTL or Costa, and, they're international brands, but they're not offering a very differentiated coffee experience.
Yeah.
It's very much a commodity coffee product. And so we started doing research, and we found that were estates in India who were producing very high quality coffee, but they weren't focused on the domestic market. They were focused on exporting it because they felt at that point in time, Indian consumers didn't care or understand or appreciate, or more importantly, were willing to pay for better quality coffee. So having been exposed to sort of the specialty coffee culture outside of India, we felt that there would be other people like us who would be interested in experiencing that here. And because the coffee is grown here domestically, that's also a great linkage. And so that's kind of how we started. We went down south. We convinced these growers to sell us their export quality coffee. And then we started roasting very simply as a kind of out of a small spare bedroom in my wife's parents' house. So I would roast the coffee and she would do the packaging.
Yeah.
It wasn't started with sort of a business plan or anything. It was more just this is something that we're interested in, and the product that we believe in. There must be other people like us who are looking for that.
It was really a function of you being passionate about coffee.
Yeah.
And also, I think it also became your edge as well, that you saw, how coffee culture evolved in the US.
Yeah.
And you could see over time the same culture would come to India.
Yeah.
And might as well we go build that culture.
Yeah.
And Matt, how were the early days like? You must have raised some capital. Maybe talk us through the first cafe you opened. Those moments that you still cherish or remember.
Yeah. So I think even before we raised capital, we had hired some employees. We actually put in a commercial roaster in Narmata's parents' house, and it sort of reached a point where there was acceptance of the product. People really enjoyed the product that we had, but we had to decide, did we want to sort of keep it a kind of mom and pop lifestyle business? We even considered moving to Goa at that time just to have the lifestyle and run a small coffee roastery there. Or did we want to raise outside capital and scale? And so, we felt that there was an opportunity. I think when we started, we were a bit early, but we did see that, like, as you rightly said, that, I've seen coffee culture grow in the US. It's only a matter of time before it happens in India. And so we decided that we had some small first mover advantage. So let's try and capitalize that and raise outside capital. So not being, I would say, one of the downsides of not being from here is that we weren't really plugged into any sort of funding ecosystem. So we raised capital in a very, I would say, haphazard manner. I had some customer we had reached out, and so we had a conversation with him. He ended up not funding us. But through a friend, we got connected to the Snow Leopard, which is the Kirloskar family office. And so they're the ones who did the seed round, and that enabled us to obviously move out of Namrata's parents' house, and then we moved into a neighborhood of Delhi called Sedilajab, which is near Saket. And actually at that point in time, now if you come and visit, it's become like I would say a little bit of like a down market Haas cause. But at that point in time, there were no businesses there. It was mostly just warehouses. But because we were looking for roasting space and it was very cheap, that's how we ended up there. And then we had some extra space, and we thought, why not open up a cafe? So I mentioned there's no natural footfalls. We were only serving coffee at that time, but to our surprise, we found people coming and seeking us out just for the quality of coffee that we were offering. There's a story actually where Namrata was there with her mom, and this Mercedes pulled up, and my mother-in-law, she's always very curious and very proud, so she was kind of following behind them to see what they were doing, because they had left our cafe, and then the woman was saying, like, why are you coming here, to her friend, and the friend said, well, this is the best coffee in town. So that was really kind of heartening to see that, it's something that people are willing to go out of the way for. Like they care so much about coffee that if they find a better cup of coffee, then they're willing to come and visit. So having those, I think a big part of our success is going into the retail format and having our own cafes. I think that if we were just an online business or a pure product business at the stage that the coffee industry is at right now, that would have been a very hard business to scale.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, initially you started off as just selling the roasted coffee beans,
Yeah.
right? And then the cafe, and then you started getting customer love.
Yeah.
And that's, that gave you confidence, and you just started building on top of that.
Correct.
And we know that back in, I think, 2012, as you said, there were coffee brands like CCD, Barista, and few others, but
Yeah.
they were really giving that social space,
Yeah.
but not really the high quality coffee. And you came in and you started giving customers high quality coffee and
Yeah.
the experience. And what has really worked for you in the hindsight, Matt? Like, if you were to pick, let's say, two or three things that really helped you become who you are today.
Yeah, so I think having being like sort of a pioneer has helped us a bit. I think because there was no real specialty coffee culture or industry domestically when we started. There was one other company who was sourcing coffee from the States, but the idea was that one, I mentioned that Indian consumers are not really willing to pay, and two, the idea that if you find some coffee that's good, don't tell anybody about it because other people will copy it. So I mean, I remember initially when we were having conversations, people were saying, don't tell anybody where you get the coffee from because then some other person will go there and buy that coffee and start their own brand. So for us, it was like trying to do things differently. One is by bringing specialty coffee to the market, but two, having a brand and ethos that was very transparent and honest and open. So from the very beginning, we put the name of the estate that we were sourcing the coffee from. We actually, that's how we name the products. It says Atakan Estate, for example. That coffee comes from Atakan Estate. Yeah, because apart from the transparency aspect, it's very important that people know that this is a product from India and the work that's happening at this particular farm is ultimately leading to the flavor that you're getting in your cup. And so it's not just the name of the estate. We put the date that coffee was roasted because coffee is actually a perishable product. So you definitely want to know when it was roasted because ideally there's a certain time frame that you need to consume that to get the maximum flavor out of that. Previously, people were just putting best before dates.
Yeah.
So you have no idea. That could be like
This
roasted
is what I've
1
seen.
month or 6 months ago. So that was also something that was important. And then I think, the building the brand. So I was very much just about product. Namrata is the one who was like, okay, we have to have packaging that looks nice and packaging that reflects kind of where the coffee comes from. So she actually made the logo. The logo is a peacock. Peacock is the national bird of India because we really wanted to highlight that this is Indian coffee. She was the one who wanted to put the art on the back, so combined sort of traditional Indian art with images of the farm, and that really became kind of iconic for us in a way. And like the packaging, we even seen people frame the packaging, which is something that really helped a lot.
Got it. Matt, I might be completely wrong, but back in, let's say, 2014, 16, even 17, 18, did customers really care about knowing where the coffee is coming from, or they did care, or has it evolved over the years that people started caring for the transparency?
Yeah, so I think at beginning when we started, I think people didn't really care. I think they were interested in learning the story. So we would do interviews with farmers. We would do write-ups on our website so that people could read about it. But I would say the most important thing is how does that coffee taste?
Yeah.
Now I think if you don't say where the coffee is from, people don't look at you as credible. So now the market has evolved to the point where it's a requirement. But when we started, people would just sell it that, this is like Cloudburst blend, which doesn't tell you anything about where that coffee is from. So it's been interesting to see how the consumer has evolved, and now, in order to be taken credibly within the specialty coffee industry, consumers are expecting that they'll be able to see that.
Got it. I think over time, consumers they just have more awareness.
Yeah.
Because coffee culture has embedded in their lifestyle. And and Matt, how has Blue Tokai evolved over the years? It started from you selling coffee beans, then it's the cafes, and now you have a bakery brand as well.
Yeah.
Maybe just walk us through the journey, and also tell us one or two inflection points where that really gave you a lot of confidence. You know what I mean? Like, though there are like few things in life, whether it's professionally or personally, those things just shapes you and it just gives you so much confidence.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, the business started as an online business, and then we added a wholesale business where we would supply other cafes, restaurants, horeca. And I think for the first year and a half, almost 2 years, that's all we had.
Yeah.
And even when we started with the cafes where it was a small kiosk, so still a larger part of the business was the non-cafe channel. So then we started opening up and experimenting different format cafes, and it's only been, and I would say, as because we've had to raise capital over time.
Yeah.
No one, for up until very recently, no one wanted to invest in a cafe business.
Yeah.
Right. So I remember having a conversation with a very well-respected fund, and they had said that, I love your product. If you're willing to get rid of the cafes, then I'll write you a check. If not, then I have no desire to get involved in this business. And that was a very common theme for much of our existence. And so that was challenging. So that we'd sort of have to, even though cafes, we saw the potential and that sort of as a growth engine going forward, we'd always have to downplay it. Mm-hmm. No, cafes are just a necessary evil. We're gonna scale online. We're gonna be aggressive there. And people who tried to do that route have, unfortunately, when money was easy, that was great. You could spend a lot on marketing, but sustainability doesn't come from that, at least not yet. So having the omni-channel approach was very important for us, and that sort of DNA that, okay, we want to be a brand where we're present across all of the consumption use cases for a consumer. So you might want to make a coffee in the morning at home, so we want to be able to supply that. You might want to go to a cafe for lunch to grab a cup of coffee and have something to eat, so you should come to our cafe. Your office probably has a coffee machine, so if you care about serving good quality coffee to your employees, let's have a solve for that. On the go, I want some convenience, so I want a grab-and-go coffee. So let's see what we can do on the RTD. So I think you always have to be thinking about innovating, because you can't just stick to one thing. There's no, it's not a cookie-cutter thing. You always have to keep evolving. So that's been something that we've been doing progressively. I think another inflection point came for us during COVID. So obviously, at that point in time, I think we had close to 30 cafes. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they were shut, right? But it was it was sort of an aha moment that during COVID, where lockdowns are happening, you're really worried about getting COVID, that people were putting on masks and putting on whatever PPE and coming and willing to stand outside a cafe so that they could get the coffee. So that this product that we had was something that people were desiring so much that they're willing to, I mean, because at that point in time, COVID was very serious. You had no idea, like, if I get COVID, I might die. That they were willing to put themselves at some personal risk to come and visit us so that they could have a cup of coffee. And then I think on top of that, then people started delivering coffee at home. And before COVID, delivery was a very, very negligible part of our business. But because that's people got used to the convenience of that, and okay, coffee can be delivered at home. Mm-hmm. Now delivery is close to 35% of the revenue at our cafes, and that becomes a great incremental lever for us.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And and you recently raised a big round, and I think a lot of it, not a lot. I mean, sometimes there are things that are not in your control, like how things have changed. Earlier, investors wanted to invest as long as you keep your business mostly asset light.
Yeah.
And now things have changed.
Yeah.
We are seeing this in the ecosystem. A lot of capital has gone into retail.
Yeah.
For you, I think you're at a 350 CR run rate or so. What's the magical outcome you hold for Blue Tokai moving forward?
So I think there's I think almost none publicly traded beverage companies. So, and I think that's a very attractive segment. So I think that if we're able to reach that revenue number with the sufficient EBITDA, we would be a very attractive IPO, and that's sort of the goal that we have for the company.
Got it. And Matt, of course, we've mostly covered, the nice part of how you were able to build a big business. Let's talk about the things that you mostly deal with.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a lot of setbacks, a lot of of course, tough times.
Yeah.
Uh, do you remember, maybe one or two instances they were almost like, the company could have shut down, but you were able to, come through that
Yeah.
event?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Sure. So I mean, I think the biggest one would have been COVID because I mentioned only what happened after we were able to resolve everything. But actually going into COVID, before COVID started, we were fundraising.
Yeah.
We didn't have a very strong cash position. And so we had gotten some term sheets. We had signed a term sheet, but then COVID happened and then that term sheet got withdrawn. And actually, the the problem was we had raised a few bridge rounds previous to that, and those all converted at a revenue multiple based on the April, May, June numbers.
Yeah.
And if you recall, COVID lockdown happened in March, so April was like a fraction. So we would have essentially been wiped out if that converted. Not only that, we didn't have any capital, so we had to go back to our investors, we had to renegotiate those terms, and we had to raise additional capital from them. And that was a very dicey situation because they didn't know also how COVID was going to play out. Why would they be willing to put in money into a business that is, very heavily dependent on restaurants? So we had to, apart from get funding, we also had to rationalize the business. So we had to let go of around 25% of the staff at that time. We had to institute pay cuts for everybody at all levels of the business. And these were all, if any one of these things didn't happen, I remember sitting on the balcony during lockdown and thinking, wow, I've been working at that point in time for almost 8 years. And it's all going to go to zero and nothing. So that was a hard time. But actually, I remember feeling that at that time. Was like, okay, it's been a good ride. I've gotten a lot out of it. If it goes to zero, financially, it'll be a disaster. But at least personally, I found this has been a rewarding journey. So I was sort of at peace with that. Luckily, many things came together so that it didn't happen that way. But that was very much an existential moment for us.
And if you were to pick one thing, what kept you going?
It was more that there was a lot of people who were relying on us. So we had hundreds of staff at that time, and they were entirely dependent on. It wouldn't have been very easy to find another job during COVID. So that was the biggest thing, is feeling a responsibility towards the team and trying to get an outcome that was able to salvage this.
Got it. And Matt, you started this back in 2012, and the consumer behavior has also evolved over the years. Would love to understand from you. You're the master. You've understood, the behavior of the Indian population, both Gen Z and millennials. Maybe talk about 2 or 3 things that have evolved, and what's been the most surprising thing that you even didn't expected it.
So I think when we started, we were catering to a niche of a niche. So one is coffee wasn't as widely consumed as it is now. So coffee was also very niche considered as compared to tea. And then within that, specialty coffee. So we were just catering to people who already understood the product that we were offering, and they weren't able to find it. So we were fulfilling that gap. Now I feel that one is the coffee consuming population has become much larger. Coffee has become sort of cool. So it has a cachet that tea doesn't have. Tea is something that you can get very easily, readily at home. Why would I be willing to pay for a premium for that? So more and more people are moving from tea to coffee. And then we're also seeing that within coffee, people's palates are evolving. They don't want the sort of the standard commodity coffee. More and more people are looking for coffee that has flavor, coffee that has a story, coffee that has a brand. So the consumer is becoming more evolved, and that's not unique to coffee, right? That's something that's you're seeing across consumption categories. People are moving from Kingfisher to Bira, for example, or from like the Amul Dahi to Epigamia. So without in all consumption categories, you see a significant amount of people up trading. Then so now that that's happened, and I mentioned that coffee is cool, I would say with the what we've seen with the sort of younger generations is maybe they don't actually appreciate the product itself, but they want to go to a place where they can do a selfie and it's more about hanging out at a cafe than actually coming to a cafe for a functional purpose. And so for better or worse, that's not a market that we really cater to. Our cafes are fairly minimalistic. So you won't see people taking selfies in our cafes, and that's a good it's good that the market has segmented, and that now that creates space for other brands to do things in different ways. So there are brands who focus on that, and that's great because they're even if you're going there just to be in a fancy cafe, ultimately you're drinking coffee, and so that's helping create broader consumption for everybody.
Got it. And where do you see the coffee market going in the future? I think we are at 2.5 thanks to ChatGPT. She told me all of this. 2.5 billion as of 2013.
Yeah.
And it's only going to grow 8 to 10%.
Yeah.
Where do you see coffee market going moving forward? And also, what are the interesting trends that might come up?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the growth of, if I take a step back, is that coffee producing countries have all typically been very low income countries. And so they've always focused on exporting their coffee in order to earn foreign currency to support their economies. And the purchasing power of the domestic consumers was quite low. But now these countries have started to develop. And as countries develop, you see more and more people gravitating towards coffee. And you see more and more people gravitating towards domestically produced coffee. So I feel that India is sort of at the cusp. In the last couple of years, we've started seeing more and more cafes coming up, more and more coffee consumption is happening. Coffee is becoming more present in people's mind space, and that's very much tied to the growth story of India. So if India keeps on the path that it's going, coffee is going to explode because there's sort of an inflection point that happens where it goes kind of from more linear growth to sort of exponential growth. And so it seems that we're close to that income level point for India. And if I take a step back in the organized, so you said that the total market is 2.5 billion, but the organized coffee cafe market, there's only around 5,000 players in that. 5,000 players for a country or for a market the size of India is a drop in the hat. China has, I think, 200,000 organized cafes. Shanghai is just one city in China. They have 10,000 within that one city alone. So I think in the short term, and by short term I mean like over the next couple of years, we see cafes as sort of the primary driver for the coffee market going forward. And these cafes will be a total mix, right? So people's preferences are vary quite a bit. So some people might like the type of coffee that we have. There are many people who don't like the type of coffee they have. They want syrup, they want whipped cream on it, they want more of like a coffee drink rather than an actual cup of coffee. And that's not really a market that we cater to, but we understand that that's a large part of the market. And so same, I said that some people want to go to cafes because it's a cool place to be, and they like to feel like they're entering someplace special. So the market segregates, and there's opportunity for everybody. But at the end of it, it's all driving coffee consumption.
Yeah, got it. And in hindsight, Matt, if there's one thing that you wish you knew earlier that you know now about building Blue Tokai?
Yeah, so I think at the beginning, it was a passion project, right? So it was I want to create something that I personally find missing in my life, and I want to actually physically do that.
Yeah.
So I thought, we'll start this coffee company. I'll be roasting coffee. I'll be drinking coffee all the time. I'll be visiting coffee
Yeah.
estates, and my whole life will be coffee.
Yeah.
Actually, now the 10% of my life is coffee. 90% is running a business and managing people and dealing with vendors and unhappy customers and managing is actually the biggest challenge. So you really have to enjoy the business aspect more so than sort of the product aspect. So I think that's something that I didn't have much of appreciation for.
Yeah.
Um, that's been one, and the other thing is that it's not really a lesson. I think it's something that I find quite interesting. Is that the maximum amount of messages I get is when we raise funds and people start congratulating us, which I find is very. It's unfortunate, actually. It's not like if we served our, let's say, 10 millionth cup of coffee, I'd probably get like 2 messages.
Yeah.
But if we raise funds from this well-known investor, then everybody's like, "Oh, congratulations, well done." Actually, the most successful business would be if we didn't have to raise outside capital, if we were able to grow based on being so profitable, and we're just able to scale based on our internal kind of metrics. So I know we're raising capital to sort of accelerate that process. But I find that fundraising itself has become sort of an outcome that's worth celebrating, rather than the business fundamentals are taking a backseat to that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. No, it's more of like, I mean, essentially, you're just, it's more of a fuel
Yeah.
that you're getting to
Yeah.
get to the next stage. But Matt, like, maybe one or two, a, a story with customer or a message from them that just stayed with you.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've had people who've met their spouses at our cafes, and then on their wedding days, they've gone to the cafes to take photos to sort of commemorate that. We had actually a customer during COVID. She brought a packet of coffee and brought it back to her husband, and she took a photo of him actually with tears in his eyes because he was so happy to have that packet of coffee. We actually had, and it's sad, but there was a person whose grandmother was on, she had just a few days left to live, and actually one of the last things she asked for was a cup of our coffee. So those sort of things are like very, coffee is a very communal thing, and it's a very personal thing to people. So that if we're able to play some small part in that, that's really very rewarding. That's really very rewarding.
Got it. Look, you moved to Chennai for a year, and we are here today. You live in Delhi. You built a amazing business around your passion and love. So I'm happy for you that you were able to do that, Matt. And of course, down the road, sooner or later, the company would be public. As you've talked about the opportunities in India, it's only going to boom, not just in the QSR or consumer, in other industries as well. It's booming. What advice would you give to folks who are Indians who are living abroad and are considering India as an opportunity?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think about this all the time, that there's so much more opportunity here in India as compared to the US. Like, if we were to have opened this business in the US, we would be one of 5,000 or 10,000 coffee companies. It'd be very hard for us to differentiate ourselves and create something of scale. I think that because there's so many markets that have gaps in India right now, that there's so much opportunity for people to come and be able to reach scale very quickly because of sort of the size of the domestic market. So I think that's one. I think that, having grown up in the U.S., and when I visit there, it feels more of like a country on maybe on a little bit on decline rather than on ascendance. Whereas when you come here, there's a much the energy is very different. so many people are wanting to be entrepreneurs here. The people are very much more optimistic, I would say, than they are in the U.S. Um, and I think, there's so many things here that you actually maybe you take for granted that you don't get. So like UPI, it's so convenient. But it's not something that you see in other places. Quick commerce, you'll never have the convenience of quick commerce, I don't think, in any other country except for India, because the economics are totally different. So that's maybe a good thing and a bad thing, but from a convenience and a consumer perspective, that's incredible. I mean, I think the only sort of downsides I see is that, infrastructure has a long way to go. And sort of like we live in Delhi, and pollution is something that's and it's not just in Delhi. I mean, Delhi is probably the worst of it, but in other cities as well, it's a challenge. But those are really the only negatives I find about being here.
Yeah, hopefully the government will figure things around these two things as well. And Matt, we'll switch gears here. What's your typical day like, man? Like from waking up to going to bed?
Yeah. So I have two kids. They're 5 and 10. So we get up at 7. We get the kids ready, drop them off at school. Then I've very recently trying to be healthier. So I'm 43 now. 42, sorry. And now, but I still feel like I'm 20. And I would say for the last 20 years, I've been acting like I'm 20. Now I feel that I'm at a point in my life where I have to start like eating better and exercising and taking care of myself a little bit more. So now I've started so I go to a gym for an hour. Then I go to office, reach there around 9:30, 10. Then depending on the day, there's review meetings or, client visits, and there's not really a fixed schedule to that. Obviously, I have check-ins with all of the other CXOs that are regularly scheduled. And then in between that, I look at varied topics, whether it's sometimes I visit the roastery here, which is very nearby, and see the production side of things. Do a lot of traveling to different sites to look at for the cafes and visit with the team, because now that we're across 8 cities, so it's important to at least have some connection with the people that are on the ground. So then I usually leave around 7, reach home, have dinner with the family, put the kids to bed. By that time, it's it's almost 9:30, and so try and spend a little bit of time with my wife, catch up on the day, and sometimes watch something on Netflix. Then go to bed around 11.
Yeah. How are you sleeping?
I sleep okay. I always feel that I should go to bed earlier, and then I always regret in the morning when I wake up. But I usually don't have trouble sleeping.
Yeah, good for you. I've been using Whoop. They give you almost accurate, data around your sleep, your recovery, and all that. And then, Matt, what are you most obsessed about outside of work? You mentioned gym and health. Is there anything else?
I mean, it's very silly, but so I grew up in, I mentioned I grew up in Wisconsin, and there's the football team there is called the Packers. So I'm a very, like, growing up, like, it's almost like a religion where I'm from. So I've been into American football since I was a young kid. And so the problem here is the time difference means that the game started either 10:30 p.m., sometimes 1:30 in the morning, sometimes 3:30 in the morning. But I religiously get up and follow it. So that's something that I'm quite interested in.
And Matt, a regret that have changed the way you make decisions in life?
So actually, I don't have any regrets. If I were to look back on decisions that I've made where the outcome has not been ideal, ultimately, it's helped me move to some other path, and I would not be where I am today if I didn't make that decision. So, I mean, there's things like maybe when I smaller things like I didn't treat someone great when I was younger. Maybe I was impulsive and wasn't nice to them. So that obviously is like a regret. But if I look at any major decision, even the ones I've made I've done very silly things. Like I left my job when I was in San Francisco to move to Romania to try and start a business with my college roommate, and that was a disaster. I before going to grad school in Canada, I went back to NYU, and I very quickly dropped out after a week. So I've made things that have not many decisions that have not worked out, but I think these were all based on taking risks. And if I didn't take risks, then I wouldn't be in this position that I am
Yeah.
today.
And taking risk comes naturally to you, or it has you've developed it over
Yeah,
time?
I think I've had always been a bit of
Yeah.
a risk taker.
Crazy guy.
A risk taker. In whatever limited. It's not like I'm jumping off buildings or you know.
Yeah.
But I always, especially compared to my wife, that's always a thing that you take too many risks. You have a family now.
Yeah.
You have to calm down a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, now I mentioned that I have to stop living like I'm 20. So.
Yeah. And a massive setback, which was actually a blessing in disguise.
Massive setback. So I don't think that knock on wood, I feel like I've led a fairly charmed life. Whatever setbacks have been relatively, minimal. I mean, I think, there've been many, especially on the funding side, there've been many times where we've gotten turned down at the very last minute, and it felt like, oh, this is like the end of it for us. But that helps build resiliency, and ultimately we ended up with a set of investors that we're really happy with. So if we had raised capital from some other people, that we would not be on that path. So I think that it's very cliche to say that things happen for a reason, and I don't actually think that things happen for a reason. It just depends on what your outlook is.
Yes.
So do you look at things in the past with regret and think, oh, if only I had gone on this path, maybe my life would be so much better? Or are you happy with your life and those things have led you to where you're at?
Got it. And Matt, what's the kindest thing someone has done to you?
Kindest thing. So it's very personal, I would say, in a sense, is that so building this business has meant, and because Namrat and I have done it together, we've had to sort of segregate responsibilities a bit, where I'm less present at home than probably I would like to be or should be. And actually for a long time, because like my first daughter was born when it must have been a year and a half into the business, when it was just a very small team and we were having to work a lot. So I missed a lot of her growing up. And so I've tried to be better about that, but still they're much more attached to Namrata than to me. And because I have to travel a lot, now when I come home, my kids always make a card for me. And they like it's an incredible feeling that they've cared enough that they're giving a card to me. And so when I come home, they're really happy and they give a card and say how much we missed you and how happy you are to come back. And I would say that's I don't necessarily deserve that. That is very kind of them to be doing that for me.
Yeah. No, that is kind. And Matt, thank you for being kind to me, for coming on the podcast and sharing your journey so far. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed our conversation.